Well, 2019 is over and it's the start of a new year and a new decade. So I'm going to start it off right. I got new shirts, I got 2 brand new studio lights, and in addition to a green screen. Yep, we're starting off with some higher production values this time. The only issue is, I don't know what to put back here. So you know what? Go to Twitter, @TheRetroReplay, and make a suggestion. And if I like it, I'll do it. It could be like a newsroom. I could put the old picture back that where I used to record. You could put massive amounts of fur porn. Who knows? It's going to be something different. And that's how we're going to start this year off. Especially with the most disappointing, the worst, and the best games of 2019. This is going to be a kind of different list. It's not going to be a top 5 best, worst, or most disappointing. It's going to be an entire look at every single game that I reviewed this year because I really couldn't limit myself because I, didn't want to, and I really couldn't choose which was bad, which was worst, and exclude anything because this year was kind of disappointing. It wasn't really anything to write home about when it comes to video games, so that's why I'm just going to go through everything. But first, I'm going to start with the more classic, How Did You Screw This Up award. And it's not even a game that was released in 2019. It's Fallout 76 and everything that they messed up with. Really, how did you screw that up? Oh wait, it's Bethesda. Fallout 76 came out at the end of 2018 and was seen as a disaster. And all throughout 2019, it's been nothing but a continuing dumpster fire that for some reason cannot be put out. First, there was the false advertisements of the canvas bag being replaced with a nylon bag, citing lack of materials, offering 500 atoms of Monopoly money, which couldn't buy anything, giving media influencers a real canvas bag, then offering a replacement canvas bag to the people who got the collector's edition, only to leak their personal information. Then the year of 2019 started off with the nukes not working just because the year went from 2018 to 2019. WWE 2K20 did the same thing too, when it went from 19 to 20. How bad is your game's code where when the year changes it stops working? Bethesda managed to patch in old bugs they fixed in with the patch at the end of January, then they added in pay-to-win mechanics for their cosmetic-only store in the form of repair boxes, all because they said that they did not see them as pay-to-win mechanics. If your stuff gets damaged and you pay them money so this way you could fix it without spending resources, you're paying to win. While not Fallout related, they did make a tabletop Elder Scrolls game called Elsewhere, and it was accused of plagiarism, and it was obvious that they plagiarized it. Todd Howard said that they knew that Fallout 76 wasn't going to be a high-scoring game, and that it's not how you launch but where you end up. They added in scrap kits to sell in their cosmetic-only store, so that way you can recycle stuff into scrap on the go, which is also seen as another pay-to-win mechanic because it gives you an advantage. They released a $100 a year or 13-month subscription service called Fallout First, which allowed for private servers, but anyone could log into your private server so they weren't private, and you also got scrap storage, which allowed you to store scrap infinitely, but all that it did was just eat it, and you could not recover anything that you put in there. So the benefits of Fallout First upon release did not work. And to put the proverbial cherry on top, some people couldn't even purchase the subscription. And why couldn't you buy it? Go on, guess. If the answer is because it's Bethesda, you'd be right.
Australia forced Bethesda to refund customers because of their consumer protection laws, something we desperately need here in America. There was a patch that caused weapons and armor to become weaker, and the only way to fix it was to remove it and then re-add it. Then hackers were able to duplicate items, spawn in assets from Fallout 4, and spawned in NPCs, and finally, there were people being robbed through a hack that allowed anyone with it to click on any player within rendering distance and steal everything, and I heard that even the Pip-Boy could have been stolen.
I imagine that the first major news that we're going to hear about Fallout 76 is that hackers somehow broke into Bethesda's servers and deleted the entire game so it's completely unoperational. But we'll have to wait and see. But we're going to start off with the most disappointing games. They're not bad, but didn't meet any expectations or hype, and we're going to start off the list with Star Wars Vader Immortal.
I wanted to put this game on the best games list, but it would have had to been low. But upon thinking about it, even though it's such a good Star Wars game that makes you feel like you're there and in the story, it's too short and episodic. It's more of an experience than a game, and that's using heavy air quotes. The first part of it is only 45 minutes long. The length of the game is disappointing because while everything else about it is fun, it disappoints me that VR games aren't really full games, but just short little experiences that are over before you get into it. We need a VR game that's going to be a few hours long, not 45 minutes, not 20 minutes, or even in the case of that Spider-Man Homecoming one, 5 minutes. Developers really need to push the length of VR games, so this way virtual reality is seen as a more viable gaming platform.
Get ready to go to the art store or get out those really crappy art sets that your aunt got you for Christmas, because Yoshi's Crafted World takes the next spot of the most disappointing games of the year.
This was the first Yoshi Island game that I ever played and may very well be the last. It looks great and plays great, but the music is so dull and repetitive that it'll put you to sleep. And there's no challenge to this game in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. The argument that it's a kids game is irrelevant, because Fortnite is probably the most popular kids game out there now, even though they're not the demographic. But Crafted World's platforming, puzzles, and challenges just have no challenge to them at all, especially when compared to other Nintendo platformers that have some sort of challenge to reward ratio, like Super Mario Odyssey for example.
Get ready to binge watch your favorite X-Files episodes and cuddle that Agent Mulder body pillow, because Control takes the next spot.
Control is a third-person action game trying to emulate games like Uncharted and the rebooted Tomb Raider games, but they added in psychic powers. The combat is great, but the cover-based shooting isn't as refined as the aforementioned games, as taking the Doom approach, constantly moving and abusing your psychic powers, works better. But the story is overly complicated and just boring. The characters are flat and terribly written, making the driving force of the game not enough to even finish it, especially because all the good and fun bosses are side missions and require extensive exploration, of which the game does not motivate you to do.
And finally, we come down to the game that I was the most disappointed with, Astral Change.
This was such a great idea and concept, but its execution was terrible. I expected much better from Platinum Games. It's a game that's trying to be Bayonetta, but with two characters being controlled by one person. This has the opposite problem I had with Control. This is a game that had a pretty good story, but its gameplay and combat just wasn't up to par. And I knew something was wrong when the simple act of jumping was made complicated by needing your monster thing to move over to an area and pull you over. I think if you overcomplicated jumping, you screwed up.
Now, as I said earlier, disappointing does not mean bad. They were good games, but just missed that one thing, or those few things that just made the game eligible for the best list. The bad games have their own separate list, and that's what we're going into next, starting off with Anthem.
Anthem is a sad, sad story of a game. EA wanted its own version of Destiny, a live service type of game that charges a $60 entry fee, and then sells you cosmetics that rotate daily like the Fortnite store, so people buy them on impulse. The game took 6 years to develop, but only 1 year was actual development, and that's probably being generous. The other 5 were just employees faffing about. The story feels like it doesn't exist, and I don't think it does. There's a mission that has you go to 4 tombs, and those 4 tombs have their own missions, where you need to do pointless crap that takes hours to do just to pad out the game. They also abandoned their content roadmap, and there's just so many issues with this game. All the weapons look the same, all the missions are essentially the same thing of go here, wait, or mow down the enemies, and then go here to another area and do the same thing, or play hot and cold. It's a shell of a game with no content. The flying around is awesome, and playing the Scout Javelin was actually really fun when you get into using the melee attacks, but it's short-lived. While the disappointing games may have had a misfire in some aspects, Anthem not only misfired, but the chamber exploded as a result.
If Anthem had 0 content in it, then the next game on this list, Crackdown, has negative content in it. Yes, it actually manages to take content away somehow.
Crackdown 3 was hyped up in the beginning, but then silently released. All you do is choose an avatar, go to areas, shoot 'em up, fight a boss, then go to the next spot. The story doesn't exist. The dialogue from whoever the guy in charge is of the company that you work for is terrible. The game was announced around the time the Xbox One as a flagship game but kept getting delayed. This is one of those, they should have just cancelled the game if it was going to be this bare bones.
And finally, we reached the number 1 worst game on this list, and it probably committed the worst sin out of all the other games. Trotter Saves the Universe is the worst game of the year because it's one thing none of these games are, and that's annoying.
Trotter Saves the Universe was made by Justin Roiland's game studio Squanch Games. I don't know how much he contributed to the writing, as he mostly did the voices for the game. The gameplay isn't anything to write home about. It's really dumb that you have to make the camera warp to other parts of the map and raise it up or down to get a better look of the area. But the one thing that makes this game terrible is that its dialogue is terrible. It feels like it was written by a group of 5-year-olds who watched one Rick and Morty episode and try to emulate that type of humor without understanding it. It wastes your time with long-winded, go-nowhere speeches, or it annoys you with repetitive dialogue while you're trying to solve puzzles. It's a game that doesn't shut up at all. It's Bubsy on Bubsy levels of crack when it comes to not shutting up.
And now we move on to the best games of the year, the ones that are my top picks, and we're going to start by attuning ourselves to the Force as Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order takes the first slot.
Jedi Fallen Order is kinda buggy, and the Dark Souls combat doesn't really work for a Star Wars game. However, Respawn really captured the story and feeling of Star Wars. The acting was superb, the story was enjoyable, and that's really the factor that kept me going. As stated earlier, Dark Souls' style of gameplay doesn't work for this game, as it tries to be like the Force Unleashed by giving you a bunch of enemies to fight, but the Dark Souls elements just don't work for that. This game would have been higher on the list if it wasn't for those Dark Souls elements, which really hold the game back. However, I'm hoping that the sequel will borrow more from Force Unleashed games instead of Dark Souls.
Better sharpen up that Keyblade because Kingdom Hearts 3 is going to be unlocking the next slot on this list.
Kingdom Hearts 3, the long-awaited conclusion to what Squeenix has said is their Dark Seeker saga, making me hope that whatever saga comes next, they won't make it so overly complicated with spin-off games that are canon to the story. And then after I wrote that, I saw an article about a whole bunch of new Kingdom Hearts games that are coming out, including a mobile one, so there goes my hopes of a less complicated story. The use of the Unreal Engine made the game feel faster from the start and was way more open than the small areas the PS2 games were. The worlds were fun, the story was great until towards the end where it felt rushed to tie up any and all loose ends, and then there was that blue ball ending, and I hope it was concluded with the expansion pack that came out a few days ago. But that's a really dumb thing to give the actual conclusion a year later They essentially pulled an Asura's Wrath with that. But I'm gonna have to hold judgment because I haven't played that expansion pack yet. But you gotta admit, it's kinda messed up for them to do it that way.
Leave it to another developer to show Bethesda up at their own game, which might not be that hard considering that Terminator Resistance is kind of like Fallout Light, and it's actually pretty good, but unfortunately it came out last year according to Steam, but it depends on region, and so I think it missed the mark. But that's why we're going with Obsidian's The Outer Worlds for the next spot.
The Outer Worlds shows that Bethesda is not only incompetent, but obsolete when it comes to the big epic RPG genre that Bethesda and BioWare had such a stranglehold on when you think epic RPGs. Because when you thought about epic RPGs, you thought Bethesda or BioWare. But in comes Obsidian and kicked both of those companies in the nuts while they were already down. Because they were trying to put out their own dumpster fires with Fallout 76 and Anthem. Showing them how it's done by releasing a game with a ton of content. If there's bugs, I didn't find any because unlike Bethesda and BioWare, they actually had their game play tested instead of charging people to beta test their game with their live service crapfest games.
Kickstarter games tend to have a pretty bad reputation for being overambitious and under-delivering. But Bloodstained Ritual the Night, who now features everyone's favorite big titty goth girlfriend, takes the next spot.
Bloodstained brings back that old school Metroidvania style of gameplay, and is essentially, from what I've been told, a spiritual successor to Castlevania Symphony of the Night, a game I had bought digitally but never played when it was released. I really enjoyed the exploration aspect of the game and the large open areas that encouraged me to look for stuff. The plethora of weapons all feel fun, although I'm mostly stuck with swords as the classic Castlevania weapon, the whip, did not feel like where it was inspired from. Bloodstained gives you everything you want from a Castlevania successor, and more. Because we all know that Konami isn't going to do anything with its properties anymore aside from pachinko machines and gambling.
What happens when you combined I Am Legend, not the Will Smith movie, but the original book, Dark Souls, and anime waifus? That's right, you get Code Vein taking this next spot.
The best way to explain Code Vein is anime Dark Souls. Everything about it feels like Dark Souls, the combat, the way the world is built, and how the story is told. I wasn't into Dark Souls or Souls-like games until this one, and the first Dark Souls left a very bad taste in my mouth. But if you like Dark Souls, then you're gonna like this game, and that's all I can really say. Yeah, this is the shortest clip of the entire video because Code Vein is exactly what people have been saying it is. Anime Dark Souls, and it's fantastic.
Down to the wire now, only 2 games left, and Death Stranding is going to be delivering the number 2 spot.
Death Stranding is a game that surprised me with how much I enjoyed it because it should be a game that I would hate. But the stealth sections and danger of this apocalyptic world are so engaging, and using items that other players left in the world is really nice. This is a game that requires a lot of micromanagement of all the little systems that are in place, and they all work very well together to make this a believable experience. And it also has this very zen-like feel as you walk across this barren wasteland or drive across on a motorcycle. In my original review, I had said that the game really needed fast travel. Well, I was corrected. There actually is fast travel, but it's very restrictive, because you can only travel from a base to a base. I should have been more specific in the sense of saying something like Fallout or Skyrim's type of fast travel, where you could be anywhere in the world, pull up the map, and click to an area that you've been, and then just travel there. That's what I meant by fast travel. Like I said, a more liberal fast travel. But it's also a very, very niche game for a very small demographic. It's not for anyone, so I would always suggest renting or borrowing if you're not sure if it's something you'd be into.
And now we reach my personal best game of the year. And it should be an obvious one, as it is the game I put the most amount of time into, and will still put the most amount of time into. So get ready, it's dangerous to go alone out there, so take this Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield.
As biased as this may sound, Pokemon Sword is my top pick for Game of the Year. But this is my list and I don't care. Pokemon Sword is the one game I sunk the most time into and will continue to sink the most time into. Because the endgame content of the wild area and max raids are fun. And one of my favorite things to do is breed Pokemon. So far, at time of recording, I've put in at least 100 hours into the game so far. And once Pokemon Home is out, where I'll be able to transfer the Galar Dex only Pokemon from the 3DS games over to Pokemon Home, oh yeah, I'm going to be dumping a lot more time into it, especially when they release those new expansions this year.
And that wraps up the games of 2019. You know, it was a rather tepid year for video games, 2019. But I guess that's what happens when you push back all your big blockbuster releases. Oh, I can't wait for Doom Eternal. I want that game so badly right now. And I hope you're going to enjoy these higher production values. The lighting and video quality may suffer a little bit as I get used to using green screens, studio lights, and adjusting and tweaking the video files this way they're nice and crystal clear. So you're just going to have to bear with me on that. But, like I said before in the beginning of the review, go to my Twitter and give me suggestions for what you want to see for this green screen background. Yeah, I can't wait to see what people suggest.